That evening, the city streets were alive with movement, cars rushing by, neon signs flickering, and people walking with hurried steps, lost in their own worlds. But amid the chaos, a young boy stood alone near a fancy restaurant, shivering under the glow of the streetlights. His clothes were torn, his face smudged with dirt, and his small hands clutched his empty stomach. He had been homeless for as long as he could remember, surviving on scraps, watching people go in and out of places he could never afford to enter. Inside the restaurant, a man in an expensive suit sat at a candlelit table, checking his gold watch. He was Victor Langford, a billionaire known for his ruthless business tactics and extravagant lifestyle. But tonight wasn't just another dinner for him. It was an intimate evening with his wife, Helena. She sat across from him, elegantly dressed, her red lips curling into a smile as she poured him a glass of wine. Victor sighed, rubbing his temples. His work had been exhausting, and he was looking forward to a quiet night. But something felt off. He couldn't quite place it, but there was an uneasiness in the air, like the silence before a storm. Outside, the homeless boy, Liam, watched through the restaurant's glass windows, his sharp eyes scanning the couple. He wasn't just standing there by chance. He had been following Helena all day. He had seen her slip something into her husband's drink when she thought no one was looking. He didn't know why, but the look on her face told him everything. She wanted Victor dead. Liam's heart pounded. He had to warn him. But how? No one ever listened to street kids. He had tried before, asking for help, telling people what he had seen in the past, but they always brushed him off, treated him like he was invisible. Still, he had to try. Without thinking, Liam pushed through the restaurant's entrance, his small frame nearly knocking into the suited host. The warmth of the room hit him instantly, along with the stares of well-dressed guests who clearly didn't approve of his presence. "Hey, you can't be in here," the host snapped, grabbing Liam's arm. Victor looked up, confused by the commotion. His wife's face stiffened, her grip tightening around her wine glass. "Please, sir, don't drink that. Your wife put something in it," Liam shouted, his voice cracking. For a second, time seemed to freeze. The entire restaurant went silent. The guests stared, whispers already spreading through the crowd. Helena's eyes widened, but then, just as quickly, she composed herself, letting out a soft laugh. "What nonsense is this?" she said, shaking her head. "This boy is clearly lost. Someone, take him outside." But Liam didn't back down. "I saw her," he insisted, his voice desperate. "She thought no one was watching, but I was. Please, sir, don't drink it." Victor's eyes darted between Liam and his wife. His grip on the wine glass tightened. He had known Helena for years, trusted her, loved her. But something in the boy's voice, the sheer terror in his eyes, made Victor hesitate. Helena reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "Darling, don't let a street rat ruin our night." Victor looked at her carefully, the uneasiness in his stomach growing. He had spent his entire life making deals, reading people, knowing when someone was lying. And right now, something about Helena's expression, it wasn't anger, it wasn't confusion, it was fear. His pulse quickened. Liam struggled in the grip of the restaurant staff, his voice breaking. "Please, I'm not lying. If you drink that, you'll..." Victor's hand trembled over the glass. The entire room held its breath. And then, with one swift motion, he placed the glass back down. Helena's smile faltered. Victor exhaled slowly and turned to the boy. "Tell me everything you saw." The restaurant remained silent, but in that moment, the air had shifted. This wasn't just a ruined dinner anymore. This was something far more dangerous. And as Victor met his wife's gaze, for the first time in their marriage, he wondered if he had been sleeping next to a stranger all along. Victor leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly against the table as his eyes remained locked onto Helena's face. The air between them had changed. It was no longer the comfortable, familiar presence of a husband and wife sharing dinner. It was something colder, something darker. Liam stood there, breathing hard, his small hands clenched into fists. His heart pounded so loudly, he thought it might break his ribs. He had done what he could. He had warned the man. But now he had no idea what would happen next. Helena let out a soft, almost amused sigh and turned to the restaurant manager. "I think it's time someone removed this child before he ruins everyone's evening." The manager hesitated, looking at Victor for permission, but Victor didn't respond. He was too busy watching Helena, studying the way she carefully adjusted her bracelet, the way her breathing had quickened ever so slightly. She was trying to stay calm, but Victor had been in business too long to miss the subtle signs of a person under pressure. "Wait," Victor finally said, his voice even. The restaurant manager immediately froze, as did everyone else who had been watching the situation unfold. Helena tilted her head, her expression still composed, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes now, something calculating. "Darling," she said, forcing a smile, "you're not actually entertaining this nonsense, are you?" Victor didn't answer right away. He turned to Liam instead. "You said you saw her do it. Tell me exactly what happened." Liam swallowed hard. He wasn't used to people listening to him, especially powerful men like Victor Langford. But he had come this far. He couldn't stop now. I saw her at the hotel earlier," Liam said quickly, his words tumbling over each other. "She was meeting someone. A man. They were talking real close, like they didn't want anyone to hear. And then later, when she came in here, I followed her. She took something out of her bag, some powder. She poured it into your wine when you weren't looking." The restaurant was so quiet now that even the clinking of glasses had stopped. People were holding their breath, waiting for Victor's response. Helena laughed, shaking her head. "This is ridiculous," she said, looking around as if expecting others to join in her amusement. "Do you honestly think I would poison my own husband? Victor, this boy is lying. He's probably looking for money. This is what street kids do." Liam felt his face burn. He had heard those words before, too many times. Liar. Thief. A street kid who couldn't be trusted. But Victor didn't take his eyes off his wife. "Who was the man?" he asked. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Helena blinked, as if caught off guard by the question. "What?" "The man you were meeting earlier," Victor said. "Who was he?" Helena's lips parted slightly, but she hesitated for just a second too long. Victor felt something inside him shift. That hesitation, that tiny pause, told him everything. He knew when someone was lying. He had built his empire on knowing. "I don't know what this child thinks he saw," Helena finally said, recovering. "But I wasn't meeting anyone. I went shopping this afternoon, that's all." Victor exhaled slowly, rubbing his jaw. The tension in his chest tightened. Liam saw the way Victor's expression hardened, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this man would actually believe him. Victor glanced down at the wine glass still sitting on the table. Then, without a word, he slowly pushed it to the side, away from him. Helena's face remained calm, but her fingers curled slightly against the tablecloth. "I think I've lost my appetite," Victor murmured. Then he looked at Liam. "Come with me." Liam's eyes widened. "What?" Victor stood, pulling his wallet from his pocket and tossing several large bills onto the table. "We're leaving," he said. Helena's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. "Victor, you cannot be serious." Victor looked down at her. For years he had trusted her, shared his life with her. But now, sitting across from her, he wasn't sure who she really was anymore. "I'm very serious," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He gently pulled his hand away. Helena's jaw tightened, but she didn't stop him as he turned to Liam and motioned for him to follow. The entire restaurant watched in stunned silence as Victor Langford, one of the most powerful men in the city, walked out the door with a homeless boy trailing behind him. Liam kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting Helena to come after them, to scream, to do something. But she didn't. She just sat there, unmoving, her expression unreadable. As soon as they stepped outside, Victor took a deep breath, shoving his hands into his pockets. The night air was cold, but Liam barely noticed. He was still processing what had just happened. Victor turned to him. "All right, kid, tell me everything, and don't leave anything out." Liam nodded quickly, his throat dry. He wasn't sure where this night would lead, but one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. Liam's breath was uneven as he hurried to keep up with Victor's long strides. His mind raced. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected the billionaire to believe him, let alone walk out of the restaurant with him. Victor saw the hesitation in his face. "I'll make sure nothing happens to you," he said. "You saved my life tonight. The least I can do is protect yours." Liam still wasn't sure what he was getting himself into, but he knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. If Helena had gone this far to try to get rid of her husband, she wasn't going to give up easily. And somewhere out there, the man she had met earlier, the one with the scar and the gloves, was waiting for an outcome that never happened. Something told Liam that when he found out, things were going to get even worse. Victor's mind was racing, but his expression remained cold and unreadable. He had spent years mastering the art of control, controlling his business, his image, his wealth. But right now, control was slipping through his fingers like sand. Liam walked beside him, small and quiet, but his presence was undeniable. The boy had changed the course of the night with a single warning. Without him, Victor would be lying lifeless on that expensive restaurant floor, the headlines already printing stories about a tragic accident, a billionaire businessman dead from a mysterious health complication. Victor clenched his jaw. He had been blind, too trusting. The thought of Helena, the woman he had built a life with, plotting against him sent a sharp, unfamiliar pain through his chest. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a revelation. How long had she been lying to him? And why? They reached a black car parked on the side of the street. Victor opened the door and gestured for Liam to get in. The boy hesitated. "Where are we going?" Liam asked, his voice careful. "To find out the truth," Victor said. Liam climbed in, his small hands gripping the edge of the seat as the door shut behind him. The air inside the car was thick with tension. Victor pulled out his phone again and made another call. "Tell me you have something," he said the moment the line connected. The voice on the other end was steady. "She's at the penthouse, but she's not alone." Victor's fingers tightened around the phone. "Who's with her?" "A man. Matches the description the kid gave. Scar near the eyebrow. Black gloves." Liam's stomach dropped. "That's him," he whispered. Victor's face darkened. "Do we have a name?" The line was silent for a moment. Then the voice said, "Nathan Hale." Victor's body tensed. The name sent a jolt through his memory. He had heard it before: a fixer, a shadow who worked behind the scenes for people with enough money to erase problems. But the fact that Nathan Hale was in his home, with his wife, meant this wasn't just a mistake. This was planned. "Keep eyes on them," Victor said. "I'm on my way." He ended the call and started the car. The tires screeched as he pulled onto the road, weaving through traffic with precision. Liam clutched the seatbelt, his breath shallow. "Who is he?" Liam asked. Victor kept his eyes on the road. "Someone who doesn't leave loose ends." Liam didn't need to ask what that meant. His fingers curled into fists. Victor's penthouse loomed in the distance, its glass windows glowing against the night sky. It had always felt like a fortress, an untouchable kingdom above the city. But now it felt different. It felt like a trap. As they approached the underground parking entrance, Victor slowed the car. His mind was running through every possible scenario. He wasn't walking into this blind. He had power, connections. But he also had something stronger, his instincts. And right now, they were screaming that this wasn't over. He turned to Liam. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low but firm. "Stay close. Don't speak unless I tell you to. If anything happens, run. Don't look back." Liam swallowed hard but nodded. He wasn't sure what scared him more, the idea of stepping into danger or the thought of leaving Victor to face it alone. Victor took a deep breath and drove into the underground parking lot. The moment the car stopped, two men in dark suits approached. Victor's security. "Stay here," he told Liam before stepping out. The guards were already tense. "Mr. Langford, we have a situation," one of them said. Victor's gaze was sharp. "Tell me everything." "Your wife arrived about an hour ago. 20 minutes later, Hale showed up. They're in the penthouse. We haven't made a move yet, but something's off." Victor's muscles tightened. "How many men do I have inside?" "2, but they haven't reported back in the last 10 minutes. Victor didn't like that. Not one bit. He exhaled slowly, his mind calculating every move. Then he glanced back at Liam, who was peering through the car window waiting. Victor motioned for him to get out. "You stay by my side, no matter what." Liam's heart pounded, but he nodded. Together, they stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut with a quiet hiss. As the numbers climbed, the air grew heavier. Victor led them down the sidewalk, away from the bright lights and watchful eyes of the restaurant's guests. He didn't speak for a while, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his jaw tense. Liam felt like he should say something, but he didn't know what. He had never been this close to someone like Victor Langford before. People like him didn't notice kids like Liam. They stopped at the entrance of a quiet alleyway. The city's noise hummed around them, cars rushing past, distant sirens wailing. Victor finally turned to face Liam, his sharp eyes scanning the boy as if trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. "Start from the beginning," Victor said, his voice low. "Everything you saw, every detail." Liam swallowed hard. I was near the hotel this afternoon. I hang out there sometimes. People throw out food in the back alley." He felt embarrassed saying it, but Victor didn't react. "I saw her, your wife. She was standing outside, waiting for someone. Then this man showed up. He was wearing a suit, but not like yours. He looked different, like someone trying too hard to blend in." Victor listened intently, his expression unreadable. "Go on." "They talked for a while," Liam continued. "I couldn't hear everything, but she kept looking around, like she didn't want anyone to see them. Then he gave her something, a small packet. She took it and put it in her purse. He said something before he left. I think he said, 'Make sure it's done tonight.'" Victor's stomach tightened. He exhaled slowly, processing what Liam had just told him. It was one thing for a child to make up a story, but the details, Helena meeting a man in secret, the packet, the urgency in the stranger's words, it was too specific, too real. "Did you get a good look at the man?" Victor asked. Liam nodded. He had short hair, dark, a little scar near his eyebrow, and he was wearing gloves, even though it wasn't that cold. Victor's mind raced. He knew a lot of people, powerful people, dangerous people, but this description didn't match anyone he could think of. If Helena was involved with someone like that, what had she gotten herself into? Victor ran a hand through his hair, suddenly feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. He had spent years building his empire, surrounding himself with wealth and power, thinking he had control over every aspect of his life. But now, sitting in the middle of the city, talking to a homeless boy about his own wife possibly trying to kill him, he felt like he was standing on the edge of something far bigger than he understood. Liam shifted on his feet, unsure what to say next. He could tell Victor was deep in thought, trying to piece everything together. Finally, Victor spoke. "If what you're saying is true, then my wife." He hesitated, the words difficult to say. "She wanted me dead." Liam nodded slowly. "I think so." Victor let out a breath, steadying himself. "And you had no reason to warn me. You don't know me. You could have just walked away." Liam bit his lip. "I've seen bad things happen before. People ignoring them, pretending they don't see. But I couldn't let this happen. I don't know why. I just couldn't." Victor studied him for a moment, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick stack of bills. He held it out. "Here, take this." Liam frowned, his small hands hesitating before reaching for it. He had never held this much money before, but as his fingers brushed the cash, something made him stop. He looked up at Victor. "I don't want money," he said quietly. "I just don't want you to die." Victor's grip on the bills tightened slightly. He wasn't used to people rejecting his money. But he could see it in the boy's eyes. He wasn't lying. He really didn't care about the money. That unsettled Victor more than he expected. He slowly put the cash back in his pocket. "All right," he said. "Then tell me this. If Helena was willing to go this far, what do you think she'll do when she realizes I didn't drink the wine?" Liam's stomach sank. He hadn't thought about that. Victor took a deep breath and pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen for a moment before dialing a number. It rang twice before a voice answered. "Mr. Langford." Victor's voice was calm, but his grip on the phone was tight. "Find out where my wife is right now. I want to know who she's with, where she's going, and who she's talked to in the last 24 hours. There was a short pause. "Understood." Victor hung up and slipped the phone back into his coat. He turned to Liam. "You're coming with me." Liam blinked. "What?" "I don't know who that man was, or how deep this goes," Victor said. "But if Helena knows you saw something, you're in danger too." Liam's chest tightened. He had been alone for so long, he had learned how to avoid trouble. But this was something he had never dealt with before. Victor's fingers twitched at his side. He had walked into negotiations with billionaires, into meetings that decided the fate of industries. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was personal. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. The penthouse was silent, too silent. Victor stepped forward, his footsteps echoing against the marble floors. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the walls. The glass windows revealed the sprawling city below, but inside, everything was frozen. Then he saw them. Helena was standing near the bar, her posture tense, her fingers gripping a wine glass. Across from her, leaning against the counter, was Nathan Hale. He was as Liam had described, sharp features, a faint scar near his brow, dressed in dark, effortless clothing. His eyes flickered to Victor the moment he entered, and the smallest of smirks touched his lips. Victor felt Liam press closer to his side. He could feel the boy's pulse racing, but he didn't say a word. Helena's face remained calm, but Victor could see it now, the cracks, the strain behind her carefully crafted mask. "You're home early," she said smoothly, swirling a wine in her glass. Victor didn't answer. His gaze shifted to the two security guards stationed near the windows. They weren't moving. Something was wrong. Then realization hit him. They weren't just standing still. They were dead. A slow, cold rage spread through Victor's chest. Helena noticed his expression and sighed. "I was hoping we could talk before you jumped to conclusions." Victor's voice was eerily calm. "Talk." She set the wine glass down. "Yes, about what happens next." Nathan Hale pushed away from the counter, his movements slow and deliberate. His eyes gleamed with something dangerous. "We have a problem, Langford," he said. His voice was smooth, almost casual. "You were supposed to be dead by now." Victor didn't flinch. "And yet, here I am." Nathan chuckled. "Unfortunate." Liam's small fingers tightened around Victor's sleeve. He could feel the storm building in the air, the moment before everything shattered. Victor's gaze didn't leave his wife. "Why?" Helena tilted her head, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Because I got tired of waiting." Victor felt something in him crack. She said it so easily, so coldly, as if their life together meant nothing. Nathan Hale reached into his coat pocket. The tension in the room coiled like a tightened spring. Victor knew they were seconds away from something irreversible. The game was no longer about betrayal. It was about survival. Victor's breath was slow and measured, but inside, his pulse pounded like a war drum. His wife, his partner, the woman he had built a life with, had just admitted to trying to kill him. And she had done it without a trace of hesitation. Nathan Hale's fingers twitched near his coat pocket. Victor knew what that meant. A man like Hale didn't waste time with idle threats. He was here to finish the job. The room was suffocating with silence. Liam's grit on Victor's sleeve tightened, but the boy didn't move, didn't make a sound. Smart kid. Helena exhaled softly, tilting her head like she was already bored of this game. It didn't have to be this way, Victor, she said. I gave you so many chances to see it for yourself. Victor kept his expression unreadable. See what? That you're already dead, she said quietly. You just didn't know it yet. Nathan's hand shot forward. Victor moved faster. In a split second, he grabbed the heavy crystal decanter from the bar and hurled it straight at Nathan's head. The glass shattered against his skull, sending him stumbling back, but not before Victor lunged. He gripped Liam by the collar and yanked him aside just as a gunshot rang out. The bullet buried itself into the marble countertop where Victor had been standing a second ago. Liam let out a sharp gasp, but Victor didn't stop. He pushed the boy toward the hallway. Run. Liam hesitated, his wide eyes locked on Victor. Now, Victor barked. Liam turned and sprinted. Nathan groaned, shaking off the daze from the blow. Blood trickled from his forehead, but his focus was razor-sharp. He raised the gun again. Victor ducked just as another shot fired. The bullet shattered the glass railing behind him. Helena let out an annoyed sigh. Nathan, handle this already. Victor didn't wait for Nathan to recover. He lunged forward, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it sharply. The gun went off again, the bullet lodging into the ceiling. Nathan cursed, but Victor used the momentum to slam him against the counter. Helena moved then, reaching into her purse. Victor barely caught the motion in his peripheral vision. He kicked Nathan back and pivoted just in time to see Helena pulling out a sleek silver syringe. Adrenaline shot through Victor's veins. He didn't know what was inside that syringe, but he had no intention of finding out. She lunged at him, her expression finally breaking into something raw, something desperate. You should have just let it happen, Victor, she hissed. He sidestepped, grabbing her wrist before she could stab the needle into his neck. What is this? He growled, tightening his grip. Helena's eyes burned with something between fury and satisfaction. A guarantee. Victor twisted her wrist, forcing her to drop the syringe. It clattered to the floor. Behind him, Nathan had recovered. Victor turned just in time to see the man reaching for his gun again. But before he could grab it, a sharp crack echoed through the penthouse. Nathan staggered forward, his face contorting in confusion before he collapsed onto the floor. Behind him, gripping a shattered lamp with shaking hands, stood Liam. The boy's chest was rising and falling rapidly, his eyes locked on Nathan's unmoving body. Victor didn't hesitate. He pulled Liam back and turned to Helena, who had taken a step toward the fallen syringe. Don't, Victor warned. She froze, her hands trembling slightly. For the first time that night, the confidence in her expression cracked. Nathan groaned from the floor, but he wasn't getting up. The blow to his head had knocked him nearly unconscious. Victor knew this was his only chance. Keeping one arm around Liam, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He hit a number. A voice answered immediately. Sir, get here. Now. Helena let out a bitter laugh. And what? You think you can just fix this? Victor's eyes met hers, cold and unwavering. No, I think I can end it. Helena's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. Liam was still shaking beside Victor, his small hands clenched into fists. You did good, kid, Victor murmured. Liam swallowed hard but nodded. The weight of everything pressed down on Victor. The betrayal, the danger, the realization that he had been living with someone who had been waiting for the perfect moment to destroy him. But he wasn't broken. Not yet. And as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the penthouse, he knew one thing for certain: this was far from over. The sound of heavy footsteps filled the penthouse, a sharp contrast to the unbearable silence that had settled between Victor and Helena. The doors burst open as Victor's security team stormed in, their weapons raised, their movements precise. They assessed the room in seconds, Nathan groaning on the floor, Liam standing stiffly beside Victor, and Helena, frozen with her hands slightly raised. Victor took a step forward, never breaking eye contact with his wife. "Take him," he ordered, nodding toward Nathan. Two guards moved swiftly, grabbing Nathan by the arms and hauling him up. He let out a weak chuckle, his head still lolling from the impact of Liam's blow. "Should have stayed dead, Langford," he muttered, blood trailing from the corner of his mouth. Victor ignored him. His focus was on Helena. She straightened her shoulders, regaining some of her composure. "So what now?" she asked, her voice cool but slightly unsteady. "Are you going to have them drag me out too?" Victor studied her for a long moment. There was no remorse in her eyes, no fear, just a quiet acceptance, as if she had already resigned herself to this moment. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice low. Helena sighed, rubbing her wrist where he had grabbed her earlier. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Something flickered across her expression, but it was gone too quickly for him to read. She let out a slow breath. "I was never going to be enough for you, Victor. You were always 2 steps ahead, always untouchable. I was just decoration." She let out a dry laugh. "And I got tired of waiting for you to notice that." Victor's jaw tightened. "So you tried to kill me?" Her lips curled slightly. "No, I tried to free myself." Liam shifted beside him, his small frame still tense. He didn't fully understand what Helena meant, but he knew enough. She had chosen greed over loyalty, power over love. Victor shook his head slowly. "You could have just left." "And walked away with nothing," she scoffed. "That's not how the world works, Victor. You should know that better than anyone." The weight of her words settled between them. Victor motioned to his guards. "Take her." Helena didn't fight as they moved toward her. She only smiled faintly, like she had expected this all along. As they reached for her, she glanced at Liam, her gaze lingering for just a moment before she whispered, "Careful who you trust, little one." Liam stiffened. Victor stepped protectively in front of him. "You don't get to talk to him." Helena held his gaze for a second longer before letting the guards escort her out. Nathan was dragged behind her, his groggy complaints fading as they disappeared into the elevator. The penthouse fell into silence. Victor turned to Liam, who was still watching the doors with a wary expression. "You okay?" Liam blinked and looked up at him. "Yeah, I think so." Victor placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did good tonight." Liam hesitated, then nodded. "What's going to happen to her?" Victor exhaled, running a hand down his face. "She'll answer for what she did." Liam didn't press further. He simply looked out the massive glass windows at the city below, his mind likely racing with everything that had happened. Victor followed his gaze, his own thoughts tangled. This wasn't just an attempted murder. It was something bigger, something deeper. Helena's words stuck with him. "Careful who you trust." She had meant it as a final jab, but Victor had learned to read between the lines. She wasn't just talking about herself. His phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket and glanced at the screen. A message from one of his top investigators. "Asterisk, asterisk, we need to talk. There's more to this than we thought, asterisk, asterisk." Victor's grip tightened around the phone. A cold realization settled in his gut. This wasn't over, not even close. Victor stared at the message on his phone, the weight of the night pressing down on him. He had thought the worst was over, that Helena's betrayal was the final blow. But something about that message unsettled him. There was more to this, more than just a wife's attempt to poison her husband. Liam shifted beside him, his small hands gripping the hem of his oversized jacket. He had been through too much tonight. Victor knew the boy deserved answers, but he also deserved peace. Victor put his phone away and crouched down in front of Liam, meeting his eyes. "You did something very brave tonight," he said. "You saved my life." Liam hesitated, then nodded. I knew something was wrong." Victor gave him a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "And you trusted yourself, that's what matters." Liam swallowed hard. "What happens to me now?" Victor studied him for a moment. The boy had no home to go back to, no family waiting for him. He had been surviving on his own for who knows how long, and yet, tonight, he had risked everything for a man he barely knew. "You come with me," Victor said firmly. "You'll be safe now." Liam's eyes widened slightly, like he didn't quite believe it. "For real?" Victor nodded. "For real." The boy let out a breath, and for the first time that night, he allowed his shoulders to relax just a little. But Victor knew he couldn't let his own guard down just yet. He pulled out his phone again, this time dialing directly. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Sir, we secured the penthouse. The woman and the hitman are in custody, and we're arranging for further questioning." Victor's eyes darkened. "And the other thing?" A pause. Then, "You were right. There's more." Victor's grip on the phone tightened. "Tell me." "We went through Helena's financials. There's a pattern. Offshore accounts. Transactions traced back to a private entity. It's not just about your money, sir. Someone else was pulling the strings." Victor's stomach twisted. "Who?" "We're still tracing the source, but we believe it's someone close. Someone with access." Victor's mind raced. The warning Helena had given Liam, "Careful who you trust," echoed in his ears. Was she playing games even in the end, or had that been her final act of truth? His team continued. "We also found something in her private files. Notes about you, detailed logs of your movements, and—" Victor waited. "And what?" The voice on the other end hesitated. "Mentions of Liam." Victor felt the air shift around him. His pulse remained steady, but his thoughts sharpened like a blade. Liam. He turned his gaze to the boy standing beside him, unaware of the storm building in Victor's mind. "Send me everything," Victor said, then ended the call. Liam noticed his change in expression. "Is something wrong?" Victor forced a small smile. "No, just making sure everything's taken care of." Liam nodded, trusting him completely. Victor didn't know what the truth was yet, but one thing was certain: Helena hadn't been working alone, and whoever had been watching him, whoever had taken an interest in Liam, was still out there. But for now, Liam was safe. For now, the night was over. Victor placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and guided him toward the elevator. "Come on, kid," he said, his voice steady. "Let's go home." And as the city lights flickered below them, Victor knew that this was only the beginning of something far bigger than he had ever imagined.